做房东不易，疫情更是雪上加霜。逆境中求自保，困难里盼希望。掌握租务法规，关键时保护自己，也实时保障房客权益。良好的关系是租房生意的关键。公平的社会，没有人应该受到伤害。作为房东，如何尊重房客的权益？如何保护自己的利益？如何遇事不急不躁？如何处置不温不火？去听安省租务法领域殿堂级导师、前租务法官 Harry Fine 的精华课程，16小时让你精通租务法，变身老房东。
Hello, I'm Harry Fine. I'm a former adjudicator with the Ontario Landlord Tenant Board and a paralegal for the last 15 years, and I'm going to make you an expert in landlord tenant law. Most people don't appreciate that landlord tenant law in Ontario is highly regulated and highly complicated. Landlords get into the business for all the right reasons, but don't have the skills and don't have the knowledge, and then they get into trouble. I want to keep you out of trouble. We're going to be producing a number of sessions. We're going to have you in to learn about rent control, about starting a tenancy, about evictions of tenants. I see so many realtors and landlords, by extension, getting into trouble when they try to sell their house. They have a purchaser who wants to move in, and they have to figure out how to get rid of the tenant. Sometimes they don't do it right, and the real estate deal fails to close. You need to understand how these applications work if you choose to move back to your house, or if you want to sell your house and have the purchaser move in. Rent control is complicated. I'm shocked by the percentage of landlords who aren't properly raising the rent. They raise the rent with an email or a note, and then they find out years later that their rents are all illegal, and they owe their tenants thousands of dollars. I'm going to help you make sure that doesn't happen to you. We're going to talk about the process under the Residential Tenancies Act, so you don't have any problems at the Landlord Tenant Board. We hope to have you at our sessions. We're going to have a number of different topics, and we'll see you there. We'll turn you into an...
老法官座堂，虚位以待。
那咱们就正式的开始，咱们就是我先问 Harry 几个问题，代表大家问几个问题，然后这个过程结束了以后呢，然后大伙儿有什么问题也都可以上来聊，随便聊啊，什么问题都可以啊。Okay, so let's get it started.
Okay.
All right.
Hi,
so I think we'll start asking questions. I will be asking questions to Harry, and these are the questions that we think are the common questions that these guys here might have. Harry, could you, like, for people here who haven't heard of you, if there is any, can you talk about yourself a little bit? I mean, who are you?
Yeah, I'm happy to. You know, it's funny. It's funny how since around 2016, I've become involved with the Chinese community as both clients and friends. And it's just funny the way it happened, because it was back in, I think, 2017, maybe, when Hong Wei and Shen Min, who's, I think, maybe here today, they asked if I would do some teaching for Chinese landlords. And I had never done that before. And I thought that should be fun. I love to teach. And I did some live over 2 years, I think 2017, 18, or maybe 2017, 18, 19. I did classes for Chinese landlords. And over that time, I got to know a lot of people from China. And some became friends. And it actually interested me so much, I ended up going to China twice because I was fascinated by the culture. I was there in 2016 and again in 2019. In 2019, I was there just before COVID. I was there.
Right, okay.
And
You're like,
I was in, I mean, I've been to Hong Kong, not on the mainland, but also, you know, Beijing and Xi'an and Chengdu and Chongqing, Yicheng and Suzhou and Hangzhou and Shanghai and Xiamen. I've been to a lot of places, just traveling the two of us, my wife and I, without a group. And the politics of China fascinated me. The people I found very friendly, and I don't know. Last night, and this is true, I was with a group of people, and we were toasting drinks, and this is what I was drinking.
People.
I think you know what this is. I was with I started doing some volunteering work where I would volunteer with new Chinese newcomers who wanted to speak English. Once a week we had an English group, and we became good friends, some of us. And last night, one of them had a party, really for me and my wife, with some friends, and there was so much to drink and so much good food. And they told me last night, they said, this is very famous in China, but I didn't know if it was true or not. They said it's very expensive and very famous.
Very expensive.
But
I don't know, it's like a 300 Canadian?
I don't know, but
2,000 Chinese?
We had a lot of toasts. And, but anyways, that's sort of how I got involved in the Chinese community. And a lot of my clients, of course, once I was meeting them in other ways, I had a lot of Chinese clients. In terms of professionally, I was, some may not know, I was an adjudicator at the Landlord-Tenant Board. The Landlord-Tenant Board is the court that is set up specially since 1998 to handle only landlord-tenant issues. And when I left the court, after a few years, I became a paralegal, and I specialize in landlord-tenant law because, the government taught me all this stuff. They taught me all the tricks, and they taught me the inside information. So I started being a paralegal, doing landlord-tenant as well as some small claims court, and also teaching other paralegals in the Law Society. I've done a lot of media on radio and TV and newspapers. I taught paralegals at Humber College for 3 years, people, young adults and older adults who wanted to become paralegals. And like I said, since 2017, I've been doing training for Chinese landlords in person and online. So that's who I am professionally. It amazes me sometimes. My wife says to me last night, like, how are we here at this dinner with 15 mainland Chinese and us? And it's just that I find that people are so welcoming, and it's become a special part of my life, and I've liked it.
So actually, guys, you've heard it. Mr. Harry Fine, he is actually a former adjudicator who sits at the landlord and tenant board.
I used to make the decisions, yeah.
Yes, he is a retired judge who sits at a board. He's gonna sit in front of you now and teach you how to be a landlord, how to be a good landlord, how to prevent problems, how to
stay out of trouble, yeah.
Yeah, get you out of trouble.
I know that so many people from the mainland come here and they invest in real estate. Maybe because you don't have the other investment opportunities. Maybe in China, you don't trust the stock market, or, there's no such thing as mutual funds. Companies who are public companies may not be trustworthy. So what do? You invest in real estate, and Chinese come here and they invest in real estate. But the problem is that it's not the same being a landlord. Mm-hmm. Being a landlord in China is wonderful. I have many Chinese friends who are landlords here, but they still have their properties back in Shanghai or wherever. And it's so easy being a landlord in China. Unfortunately, in Ontario, it's not easy being a landlord, and people get into trouble and they get hurt and they lose money and they're angry and they lose sleep. And in Ontario, whether you like it or not, being a landlord is being a business. It is not passive income. So there is more you need to know to stay out of trouble. My philosophy has always been, I'd rather have a consultation with you to keep you out of trouble, which is very quick and very cheap, rather than after you've screwed up to get you out of trouble. I actually had a consultation on, I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday, with a member of your group here. I'm not sure if she's here tonight, but I'm not going to say her name because it's confidential. She's a client. And she was smart. And she took me to lunch, which was great, good lunch. And we talked about some problems she was having and some questions she had. So we spent an hour and a half talking about her options and what she could do and how the strategy was important, how the messaging was important. And so now she will go forward with me or without me, but she won't make the mistakes and she knows the right thing to do. Unfortunately, too many landlords don't. They just think it'll never happen to them, but you know, it does.
Yes, so actually, yeah, that leads to my next question. But I mean, even including myself, people might go like, you know what? I have a house, I have a condo for rent, and I did it before. Why don't I just posting on Kijiji? You know, ask my friends, posting on Facebook, or ask my coworkers whether you have a friend or you know looking for a place to live in. Mm-hmm.
It's just trouble. I know that there's a lot of people in this group who are probably realtors, and some of the things I say may upset realtors, but doing it yourself off Kijiji is a terrible idea. And I'm not saying using a realtor is bad, but doing it yourself with knowledge is better. Because let's face it, realtors are being asked to find you something, but they're really not making enough money from that transaction to spend a lot of time and screen a lot of people. I'm going to teach you how to find a good tenant, because the only time you have power is when you're looking for a tenant. When you take in friends or you get a recommendation of a friend, it's just trouble. You know, there's in Ontario, because tenants have so much power, there's a war going on. There really is. There's a war between left and right. There's a war between landlords and tenants. There's a war between rich and poor in Canada, but in Toronto, certainly, and in Ontario. And the tenants know more than you do, which is crazy. It's crazy that it's a business where the customer knows more than the business owner, but it's true. So you get into trouble. I've had clients during COVID who, by the time they evicted the tenant, they were out $100,000.
Wow.
Clients whose house was trashed. Clients who were trying to sell their house with a tenant in it, and their realtor said, hey, give them this N12 notice. They have to move out. Well, they don't have to move out. And then on the closing date, when the real estate deal closed, the tenant's still there. The buyer doesn't close. Buyer says, you said it would be empty. Buyer doesn't close. So here we have a rising real estate market. So the buyer goes out and finds another house for $200,000 more. The buyer can sue the seller because he breached the agreement of purchase and sale. The buyer can sue the seller for all his hotel costs because he had to move out of his house because he was selling his house, but also for the $200,000 difference between the seller's house and the house he bought. This is happening every single day, and it doesn't have to happen. But you need to know the tricks.
Yes, yes.
You need to know how to be as smart as the tenant.
Yeah, so I think this course is pretty much like an equipment, an armor for the landlord to protect themselves, to protect themselves from getting into trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I can't teach you what I know in 8 weeks, but I can teach you a lot of stuff. We're going to cover things like, you know, what is the Ontario law? In 2000 and 2001, there were a lot of changes. So, you know, a lot of things you think you know are wrong. We're going to talk about going to the court. We're going to talk about, more important, how not to go to court, because you don't want to go to the landlord-tenant board.
No, you don't.
How to find good tenants. If you want to do things yourself without a paralegal, I support that. I'm not here looking for paralegal clients. I don't want any more paralegal clients. I'm so busy and I'm trying to retire a bit. But I can teach you how to go and save thousands by doing it yourself if you have to go to court. How you evict a bad tenant, how you evict a tenant if you want to move in, how you evict a tenant if you're selling the house and the purchaser wants to move in, how to sue the tenant for money if the tenant did damage and owes you money, how to sue the tenant for other types of damages, how to collect money. So, you have a judgment from the small claims court, you have a piece of paper, but how do you get the money? Well, I'm going to teach you how to get the money after you get a judgment, and all the tips and tricks that go along with it. So I'm going to try to focus on the important things, the things you really need to know. I think back in 2018, 2019, I think I tried to teach too much. I think I went too fast. Hong Wei is laughing. And I think I tried to cover too much. I'm not going to do that this time. I'm going to cover the things you really need to know.
Yeah, that is not for the legal student, right? This is for the landlord.
I know that.
We don't want to scare people away, right?
That's right. I mean, and it's tough, because if I said it's easy being a landlord, I'm lying to you. And anybody who says it's easy, or you can just tell the tenant that your son is moving in, that's bullshit. They're just lying to you, because it doesn't work that way. So anything you hear from me will be true and will be correct. I promise you.
So talking about that, are you gonna start the first session or two, and after you get know to your student better, can you actually adjust the course according to the
I've been teaching for so long with so many groups. I do a lot of teaching with realtors. For those who were realtors, I was RICO certified before RICO took all their training back in-house, which was terrible. I think I've taught at every real estate board in Ontario. I've taught at, I would say, 50 brokerages in their office, or now virtually. So I do so much teaching, and because I'm still working in the field, I have a really good subject knowledge. So, it's not like a recording. I can change, and I will change. We've talked about the first couple of weeks, how we'll start the agenda, but we also talked about how we would find out, what do you want to learn? Maybe we'll ask in the group, what do you want to learn? And I can adjust that way. But I'm also happy on every session to answer questions. I mean, I'm not going to be able to take your specific questions with your numbers and look at your documents. That it's just not going to work with, 30 people there. But I can certainly answer general questions about everything in every session, because that's what I'm here for. I'm not here to pick up business. I'm here to keep you out of trouble. And anybody who knows me, who really knows me, knows that I'm sincere. When you look at me, I am who you see.
Yes, I guess that's why the reason why Hong Wei and me created this course. We actually just we want to get our group members educated, get them out of trouble, get them better to be a vendor landlord. Some of them are already landlords. They're already doing their business. We just want them to do it better.
Yes, especially they're using the rules to practice in the real scenario. They apply the rules, to solve their problems. This is the goal of the class, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Last time, and Hong Wei and I talked about that. Last time, I didn't really do enough scenarios either. This time, we're going to try to say, okay, here's a situation that I had, how bad it was, how do we deal with it, and let people give ideas and work through it.
Yeah, like my case, that I used to think that, this is simple, I can do by myself, right? So several cases that I go to court by myself, and I make lots of mistakes,
It's so sad when I feel bad for people in court, because it shouldn't be this tough. Yeah. It should not be this tough.
Well, it's really tough. That I make the mistake, simple tenants you know, the name spelled wrong, and 20 days gone.
If you do an N4 for rent arrears, you know, like the tenant owes you rent, so you give him the N4 notice, and you make any mistake on that, you know, you're finished. I'm just going to bring up an N4 notice. So the N4 is the most common of all the notices. And if you are doing an N4 because the tenant owes you rent, and down here where the money is, you say, you say 01/11/2021 to 31/11/2021. The tenant owed me, whoops, well, it's saying here invalid date, but if you put the wrong date there, this won't let me do it. But if you put November 31, you're finished. It will be dismissed. Let's say the tenant moved in on the 16th of the month. So on the N4, you put from November 16th to December 16th, he owes $18.50 in rent. He paid me $200 in rent, so he owes me $16.50. And you go to the board, you file the application, you go to a hearing, whoops. And what will happen is you will lose because the ending date should be the 15th, not the 16th. The board will dismiss your application if you do it wrong. There's just no point getting it wrong.
Harry, you know, I make the mistake about the date, 14 days. I exactly 14 days. Actually, is going there, I filed L1 application, rejected right away. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, I think that's start over again.
Yeah, I mean, with every lesson, I will give you, and we haven't talked about this between us, but with every lesson, I have documents that I'm going to refer to along with the PowerPoint. And those documents are samples and forms and things. And, you know, we will send those to you as a zip file after each session so that you have these samples. Excuse me, you can use my samples to do it right.
That's great.
That's great. Yeah, that's the charm of a small class, I think, right? That's why if you care to join to our class, I think Harry can help you, you know, hands on hand.
I know I can help you.
Yeah.
I saw lots of your sample template. That's great. You know, especially for increased rent, the N4, N5. Oh, that's
templates. Yeah. I have some good stuff that I've developed really over 20 years, and other paralegals love my stuff. They take my courses.
Yeah. So Harry actually teaches the other paralegals. Teacher of lawyers. He's a judge. So I think some of these attendees, they are already landlord. They might have years of experience. They probably think, oh, I probably know some, a lot of the things or most of these stuff they already know. But COVID happened in the past 2 years. And there's a bill that the government introduced, Bill 184, right? So what does that impact to the, what are the changes?
It's interesting. A lot of people think they know the rules. A lot of realtors think they know the rules. And respectfully to realtors, they don't know the rules. I don't sell houses, but you give legal advice. The Landlord Tenant Board and the law called the Residential Tenancies Act is a train wreck. They are a mess, and they get worse with every change because the government always changes it to make it better for tenants. When Doug Ford was elected in 2018, I was excited for landlords. I thought, Doug Ford's a conservative. He's going to make things better for landlords. But really, he was I think, a big failure. He took two years to make changes. They just happened now. But the changes he made were little changes. I mean, you could have had some real changes to make it fair and faster, but he didn't really do that. He was afraid to make big change. And then, of course, COVID came to Ontario in late February of 2020. I was actually on vacation at the beginning of March 2020. My wife and I were away, in South America. And I remember our last stop was Sao Paulo in Brazil. And we were starting to read this stuff about, COVID. What is this COVID stuff going on? And we tried to go and buy masks and buy gloves and hand sanitizer in Brazil. But meanwhile, everybody was starting to buy it. We couldn't find anything. And then we came home around the 14th of March. And of course, the whole world had changed at that point. And it's interesting because the new bill, the new law that Doug Ford introduced, it was in March of 2020. It just happened to be in March of 2020. It was a coincidence. And the tenants said, how can you make this new law? You're trying to kill us during COVID. You're trying to put us out on the street during COVID. But the timing of the law had nothing to do with COVID. He took more than 2 years to actually bring out the new law. But this is what tenants were saying. They said Ford wants a homelessness crisis on top of COVID. What also happened in the big cities, particularly Toronto, is a lot of tenants stopped paying rent because there was this save your rent political movement from the far left. You saw the signs and the posters, and they said, don't pay your rent. Even if you're getting CERB, even if you've got enough, don't pay your rent because landlords are evil. And this is what you were hearing from the tenant groups. And they took advantage of the situation, and the landlord-tenant board was closed, and the sheriff who evicts the tenants was closed for 5 months, from March to August. And by the time some people got their tenant out, I got to tell you one true story. A woman had gone to the landlord-tenant board. She owned a nice house in North York, around York Mills and Bayview. And I remember the rent was $6,400 a month, $6,400 a month. And she went to the landlord-tenant board herself. She had a hearing on March the 12th. The tenant didn't show up. Great. So the adjudicator says, no problem. 10 months, $64,000. Or maybe it was 9 months. So it was like $56,000 or something. So, but the landlord-tenant board can only order 35. But anyway, she says, I don't care. I got to get this tenant out, send the order. So that was March the 12th. On March the 16th, the landlord-tenant board closed, and they hadn't sent out the order yet.
Wow.
So she hired me. And I said, the landlord-tenant board is going to be closed for months. It's going to be $100,000. So at this point, the tenant owed $64,000. It must have been like May. I think it was May. And the tenant owed $64,000. So she said, I don't care what it costs. I'll let him keep all the money if he moves out. Pretty good. $64,000. So I called the guy. I emailed the guy. I called the guy. I said, I'm working for Mrs. So-and-so. And today you owe $64,000. If you will sign this agreement to move out and a release, and you move out by May 31st, she will forgive all the rent.
Wow.
He said, no.
No.
He said, why should I? And you know what he said to me on the phone? He said, when the landlord-tenant board reopens, I'm going to say that the reason I wasn't at the hearing was because I was afraid to come because of COVID. So we're going to have a whole new hearing again. So he did. In August, the board issued the order for $35,000 because that's all they can order. He filed a review at the board. The board denied his review, but then he filed an appeal to the Superior Court. That's where appeals
Same
go.
as mine.
He had to get a lawyer, so I referred him to a good friend of mine who's a very good lawyer for the high courts, because paralegals can't go to the high courts. By the time the tenant was gone, it was $100,000 plus legal fees. Now, in March, when she went to the board, there was $50,000. The guy didn't pay rent. Well, you can work backwards. The guy didn't pay rent from around August of 2019. If she had called me in August 2019, the tenant would have been gone by November 2019. But she kept believing his excuses. Oh, I'm going to pay. I don't owe you that money. He lied to her and said that the real estate agent for the house made him pay the 2 months commission, which is not true. She paid 1 month commission. So she asked him to take that off. She didn't know, she was naive. And he fooled her every way, and $100,000. So finally, of course, in August, the Landlord-Tenant Board reopened, and there were huge backlogs of cases because people hadn't gone to hearings in months and months. And the sheriff finally in August started evicting people, but just to evict, even if you had a judgment, was taking 2.5 months. Oh, and then the sheriff, it was crazy. These crazy tenants, the ones who said, don't pay your rent, they went to 393 University Avenue here downtown where the sheriff is, and they blocked the sheriff, their cars from leaving the sheriff's office so they couldn't enforce the evictions. It's a crazy, crazy time. So it's getting better now, but it's still very bad. There will probably never be in-person hearings again because they've learned how to do it virtually. And because there won't be in-person hearings again, a lot of things have changed. And then in March of 2020 came Bill 184, which was a conservative government change to the law. So you think, great, Doug Ford, conservative, good for landlords. And it had landlord stuff and it had tenant stuff. It finally passed in July of 2020, but there were many things in the law, and some of them came into effect in July 2020, and some of them just came into effect on September 2021, like a month ago. So many things that you knew are wrong, and they can really hurt you at the board. And of course, we're going to learn about all those changes as we go through the class. Here are in a quick summary, the major things that changed for Bill 184 that are now the law. One, it is now harder for landlords to evict a tenant by saying they're moving in or by saying the purchaser is moving in. And there are huge fines that can be up to $250,000 for a landlord if he tells the tenant he's moving in, but then they don't move in. So there's new forms, new rules, new procedures, and of course, I will teach you all the new stuff. Good thing for landlords is that landlords can now sue for utilities and other things that they couldn't before. And they can also sue tenants who moved out but are no longer tenants. It used to be you had to sue at the Landlord-Tenant Board when the tenant was living there. Now you don't have to. So what happened during 2019 and 2020 is all the newspapers were writing these articles about tenants getting evicted because of phony renovations, tenants being evicted because of phony son moving in. And so when Doug Ford made the changes, he made a lot of changes good for tenants because it was in the newspapers and on TV. He had to do something. So there's big changes for the N12 notice. That's the one you give the tenant if you're going to move in, or a family member is going to move in, or you've sold your house and the purchaser or a family member is coming in. The whole process has changed. So the N12 and the N13 have changed. I was just asking my wife for a glass of water. My throat's.
You're talking too much.
I learned to say Bing Shui.
冰水
Bing Shui.
cold water.
Cold water, yeah. And I learned Bing Piju.
冰啤酒
冰啤酒
cold beer.
I learned that. So the N13s, the N12s have changed. The application where the tenant can sue you if you gave the N12 or if you gave, the N13 has changed. So if you give these, but then you don't do the move-in, they can get a lot more than they could before. And it's harder to defend against it. It's harder to give excuses. And if you go to the hearing at the landlord-tenant board, because the tenant says, I don't care if you gave me the N12, I'm not leaving. So you go to a hearing, and at the hearing, you have to give an affidavit or a declaration by the person who's moving in. And if you lie in this, you can end up with a fine from the provincial government for an individual landlord, like if you own the house personally, up to $100,000. And if you own the property in the name of a corporation and you evict your tenant improperly, it can be a fine of up to $250,000. So huge changes in those things. Like I said, the best thing is that the landlord-tenant board is now a one-stop shop. Tenants are living there. Tenants are not living there. You can still go. Thank you so much. This is my wife, Carrie.
Hi,
Carrie.
Oh, they can see you. They can see you. Yeah. Well, not
I can
now.
see you.
Not now. When you go that way, they'll see you.
Hi.
Harry, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm great.
So when you go to the landlord-tenant board, you can go for tenants who live there, tenants who don't live there. But more than that, you used to have to go to small claims court for utilities and other types of damages. Let me explain what I mean by other types of damages. At the landlord-tenant board, you could always go for physical damage. In other words, if the tenant trashed your place, smashed holes in the wall, you could evict your tenant and get a judgment for money for the damage. But there's other types of damage that can happen. The city gives you a fine because the tenant left auto body, machine parts on the front lawn. He was fixing transmissions on the front lawn. So the city gives you a notice of violation, the city gives you a fine. You had to go to small claims court before to sue your tenant because it wasn't physical damage. But now you can go to the LTB, which is very good. Anything you put in a lease that's a condition, if the tenant doesn't do it and you suffer a loss, you can sue. If you are renting in a condo and the tenant causes trouble and he won't stop causing trouble, so the condo board sends a lawyer's letter to you, and the lawyer's letter usually costs $800 because the condo doesn't care how much their lawyer costs because you, the unit owner, are going to pay for it.
You pay for it.
Otherwise, they can sell your condo.
Oh,
They can put a lien on your condo and sell it. So the landlord had this bill for $800. You could evict your tenant if you were successful, but you had to go to small claims court for the money. Let's say the tenant jumped up and down in the condo elevator and you got a $2,000 bill for damage. You'd have to go to small claims court because those were things about, they damaged your contractual relationship with the condo corp or with the city or whatever. But now you can go to the landlord-tenant board for all those things. And that's a very, very, very powerful thing. And that I think is the biggest change of them all. There used to be a problem in the Residential Tenancies Act where if you didn't charge your tenant the proper rent with a proper notice of rent increase, and we're going to talk about notices of rent increase, doing it right. But if you didn't do it, let's say in 2021, you sent him an email. You said your rent's going up to $2,150. Or you gave him a new lease, which you're not ever supposed to do. And you said, here's the new lease, it's going up to $2,150. And then even if years later you started doing it right, your rent was never legal because the first year was not legal. So all the ones on top of it were illegal. And there was a problem in the act where they could go back and sue you from the beginning. I had a client who was a tenant. She'd been living in the place for 14 years. The landlord had always given her a notice of rent increase by email. We sued the landlord for $23,000 because we did the math. And the first year, you know, it was $60 a month times 12 is $720. But by the time he got to year 14, he owed her like $10,000 that year. They fixed it in the RTA. They fixed it, thank goodness, so that after 1 year of you charging an illegal rent, if the tenant doesn't come and tell the court after 1 year, the rent becomes legal. That's the way it was supposed to be, but the law was written badly. And in 2007, there was a decision from the higher courts where they said, oh no, the rent doesn't become legal. So it took them from 2007 to 2020 to fix the problem. So if you think your politicians care about you, they don't. It took 13 years for them to fix this problem in the law. There's a new process, which is important, which we'll talk about, where you can now, in some situations, if your tenant doesn't pay rent, you don't even have to go to a hearing. There's a process you can make these private payment agreements. And if the tenant agrees and ticks this box and says that if I don't pay like I promised I was going to pay in this agreement, you can file an eviction application to the court with no hearing and just get an eviction order. So that's good if you know how to use it. And that is going to be something I teach you. By the way, in the PowerPoint, I've put down the dates of the classes. We pushed it back a little for two reasons. First of all, there was another class by one of the 58home.ca instructors. So we figured we wouldn't interfere with that. But my wife and I were going to go on a cruise on November 1st. We were going to go on a holiday we've been waiting for since we came back from South America. We were so excited. And last week, the cruise company canceled it because of COVID. Oh. So, you know, I told these guys that there's no more cruise, so we can make it more flexible now. So that's the dates now that we've pushed it back to. Anyways, that's some of the stuff that they've changed and some of the stuff we're going to teach during the class.
Yeah, I think it's, thank you, Harry. I think Harry covers that's about everything about the course. Probably we should, it's 8:18 now. We should give the time to the audience.
Can you unmute them if they want to ask questions?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
there's someone
85
already...
people here. 85 people. Thank you. Everybody.
85. Oh my God. That's
a
lot of people. Are you guys all landlords?
I guess, or they want to be.
Landlords to be.
Are these people who would be in that same group, WeChat group that I'm in, or are these other people from other groups?
I think some of them. Well, we have like 30,000 group members.
I know, yeah.
30,000.
So these could be people from other groups as well, right?
Yes.
Not the club, right?
Not the club, yeah. They could
I'm learning this stuff now.
Okay, we have.
Okay.
There's a question down here though, Harry. The question from the Q&A session. There's Sophia. She's asking you, hi Harry. I'm wondering if you are a landlord as well.
It's a great question. I'm not. I've been working since 2005 as a paralegal, doing landlord-tenant stuff. And the truth is, I've just seen so much bad stuff that I'm frightened to be a landlord in Ontario. It's just affected me that much. I do my real estate investing in REITs or in commercial properties, but not residential, because I don't want the headaches.
Mm.
So
So, yeah.
that's Sophia's question. Another attendee raised her hand.
How to start asking for damage money. Oh, that was Lily. Okay.
That's
Lily, assuming it's a tenant who's there and they've done damage and you think you can prove the damage, you would start by giving them and the way the landlord-tenant board usually works for tenants, for evicting tenants and money, is you start by giving them a notice, and the notice says, you're doing this. Stop doing this, fix it. And then if you don't, you file an application. So this notice that you would give her is called likely an N5 notice with all the details of the damage and the costs. One of our classes, or maybe two, is going to be about evicting for this type of conduct. So you fill out the notice, you give her the notice, and she has 7 days to pay the money. If she doesn't pay the money, you go to the landlord-tenant board and you file an application. It costs $201 or $186 if you e-file. You file the application, you go to court, you show the judge the pictures, and you get a judgment for money. Obviously, you need to be able to prove the damage. But let me tell you what small landlords don't do, Lily, that makes it tough, and what realtors don't do. When your tenant moves in, the first day they move in, you got to go to the property, not your realtor, not another tenant. You've got to go to the property, give them a key, and take a picture of everything. Every door, every window, every floor, every appliance, every fixture. And you've got to date them. And you got to save them to the cloud so you won't lose them. Because if you don't do that, Lily, and then you go to the court and say, they broke my fridge, the tenant will just say, it was broken when I moved in. I'm going to teach you how to be smarter than the tenant. I'm going to teach you how to start the tenancy properly with the right tenant, but also the things to protect yourself. So with most things in any type of law, landlord-tenant law or any type of law, people say, I read people in the group, they say, how do you get the damage? Use an N5. Well, an N5 is just a piece of paper, but it's a process. It's strategic. It's step by step. It's keeping good records. It's running it like a business. And again, and I know it scares people off when I say this, but you can't just think of a real estate investment as a passive, carefree investment. But I'm going to give you the tools to do it easily and methodically. So question. Not sure if I should look at the chat or look at if the tenant owes me rent, some people are using the chat and some people are using questions. I think they should just use one place. Anything to prepare for the course? Good question, Michelle. I would certainly think you should go to the LTB website, so at least you know what the Landlord-Tenant Board is. And, you know, when I say LTB, you have an idea. I'm just right now just going to bring up the Landlord-Tenant Board website. You know, you should go here and just find out something about it and understand what they do and things like that. So that's one of the things you might want to do. Other questions? Whoops, sorry. Other questions here. Oh.
Sebastian.
Okay, there's no more there. Let me go to question and answer. Okay.
If tenant.
How do you know if they're a good tenant? As long as they pay on time and don't do any damage, can you say they are a good tenant? Well, I would say, Frank, yes, but how do you know that they've paid on time and haven't done any damage? Too many people, and the first class and the second class will be about finding tenants. Too many people just, if they're using a realtor, The realtor for the tenant says, here's the credit report. Well, it's bullshit. It's photoshopped. The realtor for the tenant is not your friend. You run a credit report yourself on everybody. You find out where they work, but then you don't believe them because anybody can give you a letter on letterhead. So you use a proper application form that I will give you that gives you permission to contact their employer. You contact their employer, you talk to them, you contact previous landlords. There's some tricks that some people do where they, even if they're trying to decide between this person and this person, they will email them and say, I'd like to ask you some questions. I'd like to come to your house and sit with you and ask you questions. So you find out if the address wasn't even their address, but you get to look at their house and see if there's holes in the wall. So Frank, your question is wrong. It's not about, are they good if they do these things? The question is, how do you know if they're good before you make them their tenants? How many months can we sue the previous tenant for unpaid rent and utilities after they moved out? That's a complicated one. Because if you didn't sue them at the landlord tenant board before, and they moved out before September 1st, you still have to go to small claims court. You can only use this new procedure at the landlord tenant board if they moved out after September 1st, and then they owe you rent for a period after September 1st. In the case of rent, two different questions here. If they've moved out, you have to sue them at the board within 1 year from the date they move out. How far back can you go? When you sue for rent, you can go for 6 years. Other types of damage, generally 2 years. Carol Yu is asking about screening tenants. No, Carol, it's going to be a lot of stuff on starting the tenancy, screening tenants. It's not just on the law side, and even on the law side, it's going to be, practical on the law side, the way you can understand it. So don't worry, you'll have lots of stuff about the tenancy. Somebody has asked in Mandarin, but I've translated it. The rent of my long-term tenant is far below market price, but there's a limit to the annual increase. If we both reach an agreement to increase, is it legal? No, unfortunately, it's not. And of course, we're going to talk about raising the rent and rent control as well. Alice is asking about a tenant bringing his her boyfriend to live there every weekend, and the boyfriend's not on the lease. When a tenant moves in, you give up a lot of rights to your house. You have a right to make sure they pay the rent and don't do damage and don't bother anybody else, but they are allowed to have friends or loved ones or partners live with them. If you gave them all in utilities, Alice, you're stuck, and it's your fault because there are ways to do it. You could, for instance, using my documents, my lease appendix, I show you 4 different ways to charge for utilities, including utilities with a cap. So, okay, it's landlord pays for utilities, but maximum this month, and the tenant, but you have to have the right wording. You have to have the right lease wording, and that's something I give you. So you're out of luck. Can we give the tenant L1 update by email? Well, if you really mean L1 information update, that's the form you give the day of the hearing. I don't know the person's name because it just says Huawei Pro 20.
Huawei Pro 20. What phone, by the way?
I think that he's mentioned N4, right?
Well, at some point he issued an N4, but I'm not sure if he's asking about, can I give the N4 by email?
Yeah.
Or can I give it, because it says the L1 information update.
L1 is supposed to go into the court.
Well, but
right?
not the information update. That's a sheet that you update the board and the tenant with the day before the hearing or the day of the hearing. Yes, you're now allowed to email that. As of a few months ago, you're now allowed to email that. That's one of the good things that came from COVID. Sebastian asks about water bill. What if the tenant didn't pay it? And we're going to spend a lot of time with starting the tenancy and the lease and having good terms. So first of all, Sebastian, you need to have the proper wording in your lease. If you weren't clear that they're supposed to pay for water, then they don't have to pay for water. Assuming they were clear in the lease, that you were clear that they had to pay for water, then you can evict them if they don't pay. And if they pay, then there's no eviction, but you can evict them. And now, for the first time since September 1st, get a judgment for money. And I'm going to show you how to do that with that proper application form, where you can get damages for utilities. It used to be crazy because landlords went to the Landlord-Tenant Board for utilities, and the Landlord-Tenant Board says, no, we don't do utilities. Go to small claims court. So they would go to small claims court, and they would say, Your Honor, here's my claim for utilities. But small claims court would say, no, we don't do that. Go to the Landlord-Tenant Board. So honestly, landlords were left with nowhere to go. But not anymore. You will be able, with the documents I give you, with the beautiful drafting that I give you that you can use. Any of the documents I give you like this, they won't be PDFs. They'll be in a format you can edit, like a Word document, or a PDF that you can edit with forms, because I can give you great templates, samples of various types of applications and notices, but obviously you need to change them for the amounts, for the dates, for the names. So with those sorts of things I give you, you will be able to either get your money or evict him and get a judgment for money. If the tenant moves out and we don't have a new address, well, that's going to be, and that's Young Mei Wang has asked the question, if a tenant moves out and we don't have his new address, how do we get them back the rent that they owe? That is more of a problem now because you can now go to the Landlord-Tenant Board for rent after they move out, which is great. But how do you find them? Well, first of all, it starts with getting a proper application form like mine, where you're getting at least proper references and work references and family references. So at least you have a starting place to track them down. Other than that, when they move out and leave a mess, you can check all their garbage for emails and letters and stuff like that they may have their new address on. It has become easier and easier if you know their legal name, which you will, because you're going to make sure you check their driver's license before you're going to look at their driver's license, not at a photocopy. When you show your place and they come and they get an application to fill out and they walk through the place, you're going to ask them so you can take a picture of their driver's license. You're going to know who they are. And if you know who they are, it becomes pretty easy. Either you can find them on social media, or there are paralegals who I know, I don't do it, but paralegals I know who have access to the Ministry of Transport, Ontario Ministry of Transport driver's license database. And as you probably know, if you move, you're required by law, I think within 10 days to change your address with the ministry. So there's lots of ways to find people. If they don't work, it doesn't matter, because if they don't work, they got no money. But that goes back to the screening process that does not get done properly now, almost by nobody. This is the most important investment you probably have other than your own home. And yet you do it. Like, if you came to me on the street, if you came up to me on the street and said, can I have the keys to your Mercedes, to borrow your Mercedes? I would tell you you're crazy. But you're giving people keys to your house and you don't know anything more about them. Sometimes they're criminals, they're drug addicts.
Very good point.
It's crazy. And you've got to stop. You've got to recognize again that this is a business. How do you think about the Landlord Credit Bureau? Well, I'm not even going to answer that, Kevin, because there's lots of controversy. The Landlord Tenant Bureau is in a bit of trouble from the Privacy Commissioner because they don't really follow the law. And I would rather, if you asked me, I would say go to one of the regular licensed credit reporting agencies. And in particular, I like Rent Check, because Rent Check they are a licensed government credit reporting agency, but they've been dealing with landlord and tenant reports for 40 years. So they have a lot of bad tenant reports. So I don't want to say terrible things about them because I don't know, but I've just heard some questions. If a tenant is in a 1-year lease, can I ask the tenant to move out? No. And we're going to talk, Summer, a lot about lease term because you and your realtor do not understand lease term. And you do not know that lease term is a bad thing for landlords. Terrible thing. I'll tell you in the class. If the tenants owe rent or utilities, is there a way to have the LTB to issue order to the employer? No. Well, I mean, if I get a judgment for money for rent or utilities, I can take that to small claims court. I don't have to have a trial. I don't have to see a judge. I don't have to prove it because I've already done that at the landlord-tenant board. But I'm going to show you the forms to fill out at small claims court so that the court will give you a form to send to their employer to garnish their wages, or their bank to garnish their wages, so that the employer would have to send you 20% of the lease. Somebody just asked me the question about shoveling snow in the lawn. I think that was in the chat section from iPhone. Normally, it is illegal to, in the lease, have an agreement for the tenant shoveling the snow and cutting the grass. It's crazy, but that's the law. There are ways around that, and I will tell you more about it in the class.
Maybe we can take one more question. You know, lots of questions never end. Okay.
Yeah, I know.
It's 8:37.
Maybe the whole night.
Yeah. So one more question, guys.
There's one people raised a hand. You know,
I mean, I myself have learned a lot already today. Even just, you know, by Harry answering these questions, there are a lot of okay. So
she's
Hello, I want to know if when hearing day, the tenant tell the judge pay $50 after the hearing, that will be cannot evicted.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I think he actually tapped the question on the chat. If hearing day tenant answered, agreed to pay $50 a month, so they can be evicted, but they don't pay after hearing, do we have to apply again?
Okay, it's a long answer, but I'll give you a summary. There's a process at the landlord-tenant board that I will teach you. So if you go to a hearing and the judge says, no, I want to give him one more chance, where the judge can say, let's say the tenant owes $3,000, or he owes $3,186 because he owes the application fee. So he owes 3 months rent plus the application fee. The tenant can ask the judge, please let me have a payment plan. And the judge will say to the landlord, what do you say? No, he's not working. He can't pay anyways. Tenant says, yes, I'm working. I just got a new job. Here's my pay slip. So you fight about it, and the judge can issue an order that says the tenant shall pay his rent on or before the first of each month for the next 6 months, and on the 15th day of each month for the next 6 months will pay $500, and on the 15th day of the 7th month will pay $186. If the tenant makes all those payments as I'm ordering, then everything is paid. If the tenant misses a payment, the landlord can file a special application, which I'll teach you about, without a cost to apply, without having to go to a hearing, without even telling the tenant, you can get an order to evict him. So the tenant can ask, but $50, no. Usually, when the tenant asks for a payment plan, usually 3 months maximum, usually. Although, you know, right now during COVID, there was a change in the law back in July of 2020, where the Doug Ford government changed the law that said, if a landlord takes a tenant to the board to evict because he owes rent that was due after March 16th, 2020, then the judge has to consider, think about, and ask questions about whether the landlord tried to help the tenant with some sort of payment plan before the judge evicts. So if you go to the hearing, Fang Dianhua, if you go to the hearing and the judge says to you, what did you do when the tenant lost his job in COVID? And you say, nothing, I just want him to go, you're going to be in some trouble because you need to be able to say to the judge, well, you know, I asked him to come to meet me and talk about CERB and see if he's still working part-time and see if we could temporarily reduce it and maybe let him pay on the 15th of the month. I asked him to come, Your Honor, and he told me to screw myself. Then the judge says, tenant, you have 11 days to pay everything. But if you didn't do that, the judge says you have a year to pay everything. So it depends on you. And that's the sort of stuff I'm going to teach you.
It's a lot of tricks. There's a lot of tricks.
Evidence. But you have to have show the evidence, right?
I mean, evidence is always a problem. I mean, how do you prove something? You prove it with letters and emails and recordings. That's why I tell landlords, never, ever use text messages. Stop it. Stop making phone calls and stop using texts. Because the judge is not going to sit there at a hearing, you know, looking through your WeChat messages. He won't. The judge is going to say, you should have printed all this out. So don't do this. Write him an email that you can print out. Type him a letter that you can save as an attachment. Remember, and I'll say it last time, you have to remember that the court looks at this like a business. So if you don't look at it like a business, you're going to be in some trouble. And I think that's our last question.
Yeah, that's it. I think it's 8:43 now. I think we had Harry here long enough.
There's one more question about the course, how to take your class and learn systematically with you. So this may be the good questions.
Okay, take my class and do what?
How to take your class and learn systematically with you. So
how do you, well, I don't know, you tell them. I'm not involved in your system. You go to 58home.ca/shop.
Yeah, we're gonna do it exactly like this. Like it's a Zoom webinar online. We're not gonna do it face to face. We cannot. First of all, online, and then you can, if you are in any of our group, that you will see the link or a little WeChat small app that you can click on, and you can go to our landing page of the courses, and you can pay over our website for the course or register right there, or you can go to the registration WeChat group. Yeah, this page right here, and hurry up, it's on the left hand side, and we're gonna post it in the WeChat group as well for you guys to register for this class. I mean, honestly, me myself, even just today, I have learned a lot from Harry just by answering these questions. There's a lot of things that I didn't know, and there are a lot of tricks. I am eager to learn myself. Me myself is a learner too. I have 3 and 1 more coming. I really, really, really need to learn, and I want to learn. I really hope that you guys share the same opinion with me. I mean, there are like 83 of you, 84 of you. The top number was 92.
That's right.
So I'm sure you guys are all landlords, and I really hope that you can sign up for this course and to protect ourselves, to make things fair. I mean, it's been so unfair for the landlords.
It has.
If we know some tricks, we have some skills.
You can speak in Mandarin. Feel free.
Okay, so let me speak in Mandarin and explain a little bit. 那个大家好啊，我就非常简短的说一下，这个 Harry Fine 呢是现在已经给我们做了4期的这个讲座了啊，在过去的如果是大家认识朋友啊，过去参加的一些可以了解一下。这个课程呢，实际上最应该听的呢，我觉得是地产经济啊，地产这个从业人员，他应该了解这个整个的租务法否则的话，真的是很难去给自己的租客呀或者自己的客户的话，给出这种租务方面的一些这种这个意见。再一个呢，就是对于房东来讲的话呢，也是非常重要的。就是你想把这个当成一个生意的话呢，真的是需要对这个安省的租务法呀，应该有一个清晰的了解。你是在这个坐标系，不是在中国的坐标系，所以这一块呢是真的是需要了解。我自己的话，过去已经吃过很多的亏啊，自己认为这个很简单，一次一次的这个浪费了这个，因为填表啊，或者是给的方式不对呀，甚至 receipt 的问题，我都去过这个 court， 觉得这个是真是浪费时间、浪费精力，自己做错了很多的事情。所以呢，我想呢，就是说，作为一个真正的想在房东这个道路上走的话呢，真是应该了解我们这一块啊。这个在一个课程的设置这块呢，我们是和这个 Harry 的话，我们已经谈过，过去呢是教学生像这个教这个法律课程一样的，我们做了很多的一些过程。但是现在呢，我们这回谈论了以后呢，是一个 interactive 的这种交流呢是非常有用的，并且是实际的案例、实际的这个操作呢，在这个我们如何用到我们自己的日常生活当中呢，是这回课程的最重要的一个改变了。再一个呢，就是case study 啊，整个这个 workshop， 整个坐在一块儿，大家讨论一些问题，这个也是我们这次课程当中设置的一个改变啊。所以呢，我希望的话，大家如果是真正的想做这一块儿那个 landlord business 的话，我们就可以把这个就是说，希望能够参加这块儿。好，我相信大家不会这个后悔这个啊。好，我就说这些。
对，我就再补充一点，村长刚才讲的很全面了啊。就我觉得其实真的啊，说真的，这次课程它不是一个 YouTube 的这个 free 的什么这个展示啊，但是我觉得啊，因为我个人刚刚听 Harry 回答这些问题，其实我都感觉我学了好多，真的是，哪怕咱们比如说人家老爷子讲了100%，咱们听了80%。其实我们希望我们永远遇不到这些问题，是吧？一旦我们遇到了，我们能用到50%，然后我就觉得您省的不光是这些钱了，关键是其实还是省了心了，省了事儿了。
有人问这个录音不可以回放？
可以，我们不光是录音，还有录像。像今天的这个画面，我们都可以要直接放到我们那个平台上。您可以，如果您注册了是学员的，您就可以登录。随时的观看，随时的回放，一段一段、一遍一遍的看都没有问题啊！我看这老爷子英语也没问题，大家我估计你们有一部分人怕有压力是吧？我看人家对英语一点就是说纯正的Canadian 的英语哈，应该没有问题。我们也不用说实在的，他每个字都听懂，只要他讲的我们明白了就可以了啊。他会把他刚刚讲的一些 document 什么都可以给我们。然后其实真的是他，哪怕我们听完课帮上我们在实际生活中的1件事2件事，我觉得其实还是真是挺值的。行，其实大家都是在咱们那个 WeChat group 里面，都在咱房东群里是吧？哪个群里我们都会发。然后呢，我们还有一个报名群，那个 flyer 上面会有一个2维码，大家扫一下那个2维码就可以加到咱们那个报名群里。我在那个里边，我就是那个课代表。然后你们各位有什么问题可以直接问我，加我的微信。报名过程中有什么这个不明白的也都可以问我，
或者是你现在给你直接私信你的 email 也行，或者是跟你直接聊天也行，是吧？
对，也可以。我把我的微信打在这儿也可以。然后各位也可以，我的微信名我打在这个 这个 chat 里边了啊，你们都可以加我，这是我的微信，然后咱们在微信里聊也可以。
对，还有一个很重要的一点就是说，我们这班级呢，就像以前一样的，都会成立一个小的一个 group。Harry 也会在这 group 里头，今后呢也是一个 social 的一个小 circle 啊，是吧？我们在这个圈里头呢，也可以经常的进行一个交流，同学们之间的有一些问题啊，也可以进行互相的一个提问。这样的话，
对
抱
团取暖嘛。我 Harry 这个我们也都看到了，他很健谈，他也很喜欢说，他也愿意说，就是也很
线下活动的时候，我们也过去像班上一块儿出去吃个饭呀，聊天。这是以前都是这么以前这么做的，过去的前几期也都这么做的。
他一点也不是高高在上，我觉得老爷子特别和蔼可亲，特别的跟他一起听课，我觉得真的挺好的。报名就是在咱们那个房东网的那个电商平台，您如果在咱的群里，就回到咱们那群里边，那里边都有这个 flyer。如果您看不到的话呢，上边那个是我的微信号，待会儿您加一下我，再打一遍，加一下我的微信号，然后呢，我给您拉到那个里边也可以。
也是，如果要是大家有什么需要，也可以艾特我，我是那个每个群的第一个，都叫村长，这个你们加我也行，没问题啊。
行，要不然我一会儿我想想啊，我把那个报名的大家稍微等一会儿啊，然后我把那个报名的那个 link 放在里边就完了啊。
没关系，咱们都在群里经常发呢，希望大家有什么样的就
都见得到哈。
对，对，
都不会丢的，都不会丢的。行，那就
看 Harry 还有什么要说的。
So Harry, we're just gonna wrap it up tonight.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for coming.
All right. I look forward to seeing everybody. We'll see you in October. 再见。
再见。谢谢大家。咱们今天真的是没说够，咱们群里再说啊。
做房东不易，疫情更是雪上加霜。逆境中求自保，困难里盼希望。掌握租务法规，关键时保护自己，也实时保障房客权益。良好的关系是租房生意的关键。公平的社会，没有人应该受到伤害。作为房东，如何尊重房客的权益？如何保护自己的利益？如何遇事不急不躁？如何处置不温不火？去听安省租务法领域殿堂级导师、前租务法官 Harry Fine 的精华课程，16小时让你精通租务法，变身老房东。
Hello, I'm Harry Fine. I'm a former adjudicator with the Ontario Landlord Tenant Board and a paralegal for the last 15 years, and I'm going to make you an expert in landlord-tenant law. Most people don't appreciate that landlord-tenant law in Ontario is highly regulated and highly complicated. Landlords get into the business for all the right reasons, but don't have the skills and don't have the knowledge, and then they get into trouble. I want to keep you out of trouble. We're going to be producing a number of sessions. We're going to have you in to learn about rent control, about starting a tenancy, about evictions of tenants. I see so many realtors and landlords by extension getting into trouble when they try to sell their house. They have a purchaser who wants to move in and they have to figure out how to get rid of the tenant. Sometimes they don't do it right and the real estate deal fails to close. You need to understand how these applications work if you choose to move back to your house or if you want to sell your house and have the purchaser move in. Rent control is complicated. I'm shocked by the percentage of landlords who aren't properly raising the rent. They raise the rent with an email or a note, and then they find out years later that their rents are all illegal and they owe their tenants thousands of dollars. I'm going to help you make sure that doesn't happen to you. We're going to talk about the process under the Residential Tenancies Act so you don't have any problems at the Landlord Tenant Board. We hope to have you at our sessions. We're going to have a number of different topics, and we'll see you there. We'll turn you into an expert.
房东网讲坛租务法专题10月4号线上开麦，老法官座堂，虚位以待。